As you will have maybe noticed, Brazil is represented here in the Internet Hall of Fame by three typical Brazilians. There's Tadao Takahashi, there's Demi Getchko, and there's myself. And we all came together in the 1980s to be able to help to construct the first internet network in Brazil. This had a series of aspects. I only met the two of them during this process, and it was an interesting one because it was conducted partly within the scientific community. I was a university professor, have been from when I went to Brazil in 1971 until my retirement 5 years ago. And during this time, in the 80s, I was working as the head of department of computer science at the Catholic University in Rio de Janeiro. And my first activity connected with networks was just using, how shall I put it, local area networks. And then, I've always been interested in communications and also a bit in geography. I read about the NSFnet. You know? The NSFnet was started, engineered in 1985, and the news of this arrived in Brazil a little bit later because at the time we had no good electronic communications. We had to wait for the journals to arrive by surface mail and all that kind of stuff. But I was so impressed by what I read about what was going on in this that I really decided that this was what we needed in order to be able to communicate adequately in the academic community. And so I used the contacts I had in different areas to try to provoke a discussion about such a goal. And there were two meetings which I helped to organize in that year, 1987. One was just of people in the computing and networking area, and this also included called people from our NSFs, called CNPQ, who asked me to organize a larger meeting at the University of São Paulo some months later, to which about 45 people came, and these people represented a part of the government, many of the research groups in different disciplines, and also the state telephone monopoly, which was to prove one of the obstacles in the path of being able to do what we wanted to do. But we went ahead and defined at this meeting what were the obstacles and how we'd like to overcome them. And the result of this was that 2 years later, the Brazilian government launched a project called RNP, that's the National Research Network in Portuguese, and Tadao Takahashi was appointed as the coordinator of this project. And shortly afterwards, he invited Demi and myself to join him, and together we worked in collaboration in order to deliver what was proposed at that meeting 2 years earlier. It took us 3 years, and they were very, very interesting years. We had interaction, for instance, with people in Latin America during this time. There was an international meeting held in Rio de Janeiro, which I helped organize, but I didn't take much part in as far as the international connections were concerned. But we ended up in 1992 with a national backbone network which touched 11 of the 27 constituent parts of Brazil at the vast speed of 64 kilobits a second or 9.6 kilobits a second. It's funny, this was, I suppose you could see in retrospect, the digital divide between our part of the world and the North America. You know, we had this vast difference between the speeds which were then operating on the NSFnet and our own. However, that was a challenge. RMP was established, as I say, in 1992 as a network. The following year, I moved on back to the university because the option for me to continue with RMP was to stop being a professor and start being living off a grant, and that wasn't really feasible with the number of children I had at that time. So I just started reverting to what was going on, the problems within the universities, and I had a very happy few years interacting there with the new university I went to. I was at the Catholic University in '87, and then I moved to the UFI, the Federal University in Niterói, next to Rio, and that was how I spent the next 8 years. In 1999, the RMP... I missed out. In 1995, and this is important, the commercial internet came to Brazil. After 2 years of then RMP working and reading about what you could do on the internet, there was a vast clamour for commercial services, and in fact RMP was enrolled in this process of helping to set up the commercial internet. At the same time, we had a new government in that year, 1995, whose job included, whose objectives included to break up the telecom monopoly, which was an essential part of removing obstacles to bringing investment into this kind of activity. And so that was a very tumultuous period, which, as I say, I missed out on quite a lot. However, RMP's involvement was significant because their backbone, which by then was something like 2 meg connections, was widely used as an alternative to the state monopolies network and provide options for providers to be able to take their traffic to the exchange points which were starting to appear. Tadao had left by 1996, and his successor was José Luis Ribeiro. José Luis was working before that at a university in Rio also, and he was alarmed at the idea that there was a lot of discussion at that time of abandoning altogether the support by the government of a national research and education network. And he advanced a new proposal, which was to convert the RMP project into a non-profit company, which would then be contracted by the government on a regular basis as a part of the national budget to operate and run the network. And this was done about 1999, 2000, and this set the stage for what was going to happen after that. What happened after that was that José Luis decided he wanted to be part of the commercial internet also, and so he left RMP and looked for another job. His successor was called Nelson Simões, who has been Director General at RMP now since 2001. And he has, I was already known to him because the university I had been at in 1987, he was also there. And in 2002, he invited me to rejoin RMP as a member of the board of directors, and then to work together to solve the problems or to advance the state of research and education networking in order to make it something which we could best sell to the government as a fixture for supporting the part of to research, education, and similarly related parts of our society which really needed networks. So, in this period, starting 2002, RMP moved in a number of areas for the next few years, developing the network more, producing collaboration within the community of the universities to develop network services for use by our users, and also to start introducing connections, international connections with other networks of a similar kind. And these were obviously the United States, but also in other countries of Latin America and in Europe. So a number of long-term collaborations began with these other continents, and this helped to bring us closer to where we ought to be in terms of providing adequate services for our users. RMP was launched in September 1989, exactly 30 years ago this month. So we're now at the stage of looking back and seeing how we are at present. Brazil is a very large country, as you probably know. We have now clients, campus, in 1,500 points in institutions around the country. And we kind of calculate about 4 million, which is about 2% of the population, is served by these connections, either as people who work in the universities or their students and so on. The latest news we have about attacking the digital divide is we have a series of new initiatives in course. Many of these are to do with network development, and one of the people most involved in handling this is our present director of networks, who's Eduardo Grisengi. And these include, now, this is several years later after the first network, upgrading our backbone to 100 gig, and possibly it's I say scalable. I use the word scalable because it's multiples of 100 gig. It depends on the demand of traffic you have. There's international connections, which are also at the same level, 100 gig scalable. Red Clara, I didn't mention Red Clara, but Red Clara was set up around 2003 to bring together the similar networks in Latin America, from Mexico down to the south of South America. There are about 14 national networks involved in Red Clara, and this has been a project of building this and operating this network has been the object of much assistance from the European Union through successive projects. And so we are now increasing the capacity of the Red Clara network also to 100 gig scalable. And there are new international routes. There are links to the US. There's a new route to Africa, a new cable, Trans-South Atlantic cable for a change, is enabling us to get directly from Brazil and thus the rest of Latin America to Africa. And for the first time in many, many years, a new submarine cable is under construction at the moment between Brazil and Portugal, which will provide very high capacity, scalable access to Europe. So all of these things are going on at the moment. RMP is now 30 years from its point zero. What it will be like in another 30 years' time, it's very difficult for me to predict. I probably won't be around to see it, but time will tell, and I think the signs are good. I'd like to close by thanking some of the people who have been involved in my proposal to be a member here. The proponent was Peter Knight, who is a United States citizen who lives and works in Brazil. He's an economist and is a stand-up paddler. At 76, he's in very good condition. Then there are my sponsors, the people who provided support letters. There are 5 of them altogether. One is Professor Harvey Newman from Caltech, because of our great collaboration in assisting the physics researchers who are scattered around Brazil. Also Nelson Simões, the Director General, and Flavio Wagner, who is currently the head of the Internet Society in Brazil. And two of my former students, Yara Machado, who is now a director of RMP in my place, and Antonio Abelém from the university in Pará. I'll close by thanking very much the Internet Society for recognizing and approving and giving me this opportunity. I'm very, very pleased and very proud and rather humbled to get to this stage, and I'd like to thank them very much. And finally, my family. I have my daughter here with me. She's sat at the table here at the front. My wife's Virgilia, and we have 2 sons also, Anthony and Leonardo, and they follow and support me very much in all that I do in this respect. And I'd like to thank all of them. Thank you.